Hey there, students. This is Mr. Phillips, and today is the third episode of my top 5 lit list for John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. Just sit back and relax. Let's talk about the top 5 things I think you should know from Chapter 3. Let's do this. Starting things off, let's talk about the author, John Steinbeck, for a moment. Now, he was born in 1902 and lived until 1986. So just to get some numbers in our head, when he was 16 years old, it was 1918. And interestingly enough, that was when the Spanish flu pandemic was happening in 1918. And did you actually know that it was called the Spanish flu because Spain was neutral in World War I, which happened from 1914 to 1918, and that's where they were able to do a lot of research. Now, back to John, he wasn't old enough to fight in World War I. He was only 16, which is good for him, and for literature. He was also too old for World War II to actually fight when he was age 37 when World War II was happening, but he served as a war correspondent for a newspaper, which means his kind of best years were living through the Great Depression. And so his books reflect the social and economic issues that he saw. And his first book was actually published at the start of the Great Depression in 1929. His last novel was in 1961. So as an author, you can kind of see the span of his career. And Of Mice and Men, which we're reading, was published in 1937, towards the tail end of the Great Depression. And so that sums up what, I want to talk about John Steinbeck pretty well. So let's get to our list. The latest reading, Chapter 3 of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck.
First on the list, number 5.
At number 5, the first thing that I just want to say is that this chapter is long. It's probably the longest chapter in this book. It's from page, at least on our PDF, 39 to 67. And just to put it into context for us, that is twice the length of chapter 4. That's why I had us just read chapter 3 this week. And this chapter is full of character development with a lot of intrigue. You get the heart of the characters and a big step in the conflict development. So as we continue on my list, we're going to take a close look and we're going to break down some of these crucial parts, ideas, topics that happen that you really should not miss. So without further ado, number 5, this chapter, super long.
Number 4.
Number 4 on the list is something that is kind of close to what I like to think about is dogs. I am a dog person, not a cat person. And not just any dogs. We have old dogs and puppies. So number 4, old dogs and puppies. Let's talk about those two things. Number 1, towards the beginning of this chapter, Lenny is holding his new puppy. It is definitely too young to leave its mother, but of course, Lenny is obsessed. He can't leave it. He cannot part with it. So much so he tries to sneak it in to the bunkhouse because he knows that George is going to make him put it back. Now, of course, George sees him and tells him to put it back. He's worried about this day-old puppy. If you've never seen a day-old puppy, they definitely still need their mothers for weeks after that. Okay, so it's going to be a while before Lenny can just start having this puppy for his own. All right. Now, Lenny is going to definitely spend a lot of time the rest of this book looking at puppies when he is not working. All right. And so that's a new dog. That's a puppy. That's contrasted with an old dog, which is the old man. His name is Candy. Candy has an old dog and he smells. He can barely walk. It's really, really sad. He has no teeth. And there's a worker on the ranch called Carlson. And a lot of this chapter is Carlson trying to convince Candy to put his dog down. Slim's on Carlson's side. Everyone basically is on Carlson's side. And finally, Carlson agrees to take his gun and put the old dog down as you would back in the day. There wouldn't be a vet to do this. You would just, take whatever gun you had and shoot it, which is a reality. It's a sad reality um, of older times, basically to put the dog out of its misery. And an interesting dynamic in the chapter is everyone is super awkwardly waiting for this gunshot to go off. So as Carlson takes the dog out, it kind of slowly walks out. George and Slim are playing cards and talking, and every once in a while it'll just get dead awkward silent because they're listening for the kind of the gunshot in the distance. And when that finally pops, Candy is super sad. He is heartbroken, and Slim does tell him that he is going to, give him one of his new puppies. But there's this old dog versus new puppy dynamic and a kind of a lingering question. Must things die for life to move on? And, how long do you need before something is ready to be its own thing, right? How long does that puppy need before Lenny can have his own dog? So at number 4, we have old and new dogs.
Number 3.
Let's talk about number 3, Slim and George. Now, Slim is trying to get to the truth, and he's going to do it by casually prompting George to conversation. So he starts the conversation off by saying, "Funny how you and him string along together," which would be kind of different from what Slim normally sees. It's two guys sticking together rather than one guy going from job to job. And this is all about building a relationship and confidence, right? Not confidence as in I can do it, but confidence as more confiding in someone, right? You have a confidence, you tell them things. And George basically opens up to Slim and tells him a lot about their history. He says that he used to play tricks on Lenny. He thought it was kind of interesting and funny to show off. But then one day, right, he almost got Lenny killed. He told him to jump in a river, and Lenny didn't know how to swim, but Lenny trusted George and jumped in. Right from that moment on, George stopped messing with him and switched to looking after Lenny, because Lenny didn't even know he was being messed with. He just trusted George so much. And Slim comes to the conclusion that Lenny's not mean, right? He's not malintended. He's not this evil presence. And so that further gives George the confidence to say, all right, what Lenny did in Weed, which is the town he was working at before with Lenny, is he tells him the story about the girl. He held onto her dress. She cried like he was going to rape her. And then they hid underwater, breathing out of a reed until it got dark because they were being searched for, right? No one was going to believe that Lenny wasn't mean in that scenario because they didn't know him. But here you have George setting up Slim, and it's not really a setup. It's the truth, right? We can see that Lenny's not mean, but he's, inviting Slim into the world to understand Lenny on a deeper level, which is kind of nice. So I put him right in the middle, that confidence, that friendship relationship between Slim and George.
Number 2.
With number 2, we have to take a look at the old man again. His name is Candy, for a couple reasons. Number 1, it's really easy to feel sad with Candy about his dog who he raised. It was all he had and his only real true friend. So it feels like he lost that friend. And halfway through, he kind of just lays on his bunk, turns towards the wall, and shuts out the rest of the world for a little bit. What happens later is George is telling Lenny once again about their dream to own some land. And this really gets Candy's attention really quickly. A little more background on Candy. I might have said Lenny there. I meant Candy. Candy has a hurt hand, right? I think it might even be gone. It might not even be there. And he got it on this ranch. He lost his hand on this ranch. And what they did to kind of help him along, because if you lose your hand and you're a rancher, you're basically useless. You need both hands. So people at the ranch were nice. They paid him some extra money, and then they let him do something simple like, I think it's mop the toilets or whatever it is, right? He's kind of more of a janitorial role. But he hears George and Lenny talk about their dream. Right away, he asks to be an investor and to basically buy a place on this land because he knows he cannot work for much longer. He's terrified he's going to get fired. Candy has about $300, and George is like, hey, it only costs $600 to buy this land. If we work for a little while, we can probably get this. And they agree. And what we see is George and Lenny extending this lifeline, this hope to this down and out older man who just lost his dog, has no more means. If he loses his job, he's going to be out on the streets without, being able to be hired again. So when they agree, George and Lenny are sharing their dream with another kind of down and out person, which is very helpful for Candy. It's helpful for George and Lenny because now they have an opportunity to see their dream fulfilled. And when you think about Of Mice and Men, that's their station. And that kind of is one of the very, very important themes I want us thinking about is being down and out and also having a dream in the midst of that. So that's why I put it up at number 2, so high on our list today. Candy, the old man, having a new dream.
Finally, number 1 on my list this week.
Number 1 is trouble, and specifically number 1 is Curly looking for trouble. He's already spent most of this book looking for his wife. Chapter 3, he is looking for his wife, and he seems paranoid that any man is going to fool around with her, because she seems to be ready to fool around with any man, even though they just got married for whatever reason, right? You can make your assumptions there. But Curly, as we said in last episode, he's aggressive. He's got short man syndrome. He comes into the bunkhouse mad because he can't find his wife. He suspects it's Slim, but he can't prove it, so he's upset. And he sees Lenny. Now, Lenny, poor soul, is there smiling, thinking about the dream that he, George, and now Candy might share. And Curly thinks that he's laughing at him. He just wants to, take out his aggression. And so he approaches Lenny and starts to punch him, literally is fighting Lenny. Now, Lenny, so sweet, doesn't want to do anything. He says, I don't want to fight. He's just getting punched. His nose is bleeding. His eyes a little torn up. Lenny's not defending himself. Now, George is like, all right, that's it. Lenny, get him, right? Stand up for yourself, Lenny. And he does. He grabs and basically crushes Curly's hand super bad. Now, if you are a fan of Lenny, which most of us are at this point, because he's such a, sweet, well-intentioned guy, maybe he's a little quirky and weird, but you do root for Lenny. He doesn't want to fight. And so you really almost are happy that Candy gets what he deserves. But Lenny really crushes his hand, and he almost can't let go just because of the situation, right? He's still slow. He's a little slow. And even though he started crushing it, he's like really putting his full force on there. And so George is really yelling at Curly to let go because Curly's now just kind of flopping around. And when he lets go, Curly's hand is totally mangled, lots of broken bones. And Slim steps in. This is where Slim comes in. He tells Curly, you're going to tell people that you got it stuck in a machine, because Lenny and George might lose their job. Why? Because Curly, remember, is the son of the boss. Now, Slim knows this. Curly knows this. And Slim tells him, you're going to be so embarrassed if people find out that you were picking on Lenny and then he did this to you. And Curly's like, that's the last thing I want. Okay, fine. I'll tell him I got it stuck in a machine. And the thing that really grabs me about the end of this chapter is Lenny feels bad, right? I didn't mean no harm. And he asks George, hey, can I still tend the rabbits? He thinks that he's going to be in trouble for defending himself. And George, once again, reassures Lenny, yes, you didn't do anything wrong. I told you to do it, as is their pattern. No matter what happens, right, George is going to be there to help Lenny out of a troubling situation. And again, this is our conflict really developing through chapter 3 in the middle of the book, the longest chapter. And at number 1, Curly looking for trouble, and he finds it. Well, these are getting longer and longer, trying to keep it to 15 minutes. It's time for the call to action. A little bonus, they talk about Susie's place and Clara's house when George is making friends. They're inviting him to go spend money and enjoy himself, and the pleasures of the present might take away that dream that we talked about. So keep an eye on that one as we move forward. But do you see any parallels to the real world, right? What is old and sometimes needs to pass on, but what is new but isn't really quite ready to come into the world? Slim and George, right? How do you find the truth? How do you build that relationship and confidence with someone you just met, even if your past is a little questionable? How do you feel about Candy and his dog? Do you feel a little better that he has a dream now that he can kind of work towards with George and Lenny? And finally, did Curly get what he deserved? Sometimes when you look for trouble, you find it. And how do you feel about what Lenny did? It's something to look forward to as we continue. That's all I have today. Thank you for listening. I hope you fill out that survey, kind of tell me your own thoughts about chapter 3. But that's all I got. Thanks for listening, you guys, so much, and have a great day.